Hello, world, and welcome back to another episode of Practicing Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. My name's Sarah, and I'm here with my friend Lizelle. And today we're going to be talking about episode 17, which is called Gnosis and Existential Inertia, as you can see. Now I'm going to pass it over to Lizelle to get us started with a quote.
Hello, world. Yes, I'm going to read from L.A. Paul's book to open us to basically what we're going to discuss today. Choosing rationally, then, may require us to regard big life decisions as choices to make discoveries, small and large, about the intrinsic nature of experience, and to recognize that part of the value of living authentically is to experience one's life and preferences in whatever way they may evolve in the wake of the choices one makes. We only learn when we really need to know. We only learn what we really need to know after we have already committed ourselves.
Yeah, that one. We only know once we've committed ourselves. And you said something earlier about devotion.
Yeah, because you started when we were talking unrecorded, you started by talking about the certainty that people seem to be searching for, that you experience yourself searching for in the science world, and how I almost had the sense that you were afraid that you might be also now searching for it again in religion.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, it's exactly not certainty, it's devotion. And devotion does. Actually, the quote that I'm ending with is going to be something about like being devoted or devoting yourself this with this exact not knowing what's going to come, come what may, type of attitude. I will love you come what may. I will devote myself to this field, this study, this person, come what may, and then experiencing what comes after that choice has been made. That is, there's absolutely no certainty in that. Absolutely no certainty. That's what L.A. Paul is all about, or Laurie. We don't know. We simply do not know. But we have to choose.
Yeah. And that choice is going to open up a lot of different things. Yeah. Yeah. And then, like, when you were talking, the quote, blessed are those who believe that have not seen, came up for me too. Because I mean, we're going to go back into just recapping Jesus again. But yeah. So he's talking in the beginning about Jesus of Nazareth and Paul, because we're going to glean the big contributions that this kind of made in terms of understanding this idea of agape, and also the notion of how, he says, the notion of how we can suffer, how we can be at war with ourselves, and how we can be undermined, and how much cosmic forces may be aligned with our own suffering.
Yeah.
So
that plays a big role in, I know he says Gnosticism isn't like a dogma, but like I mentioned, one of the books that he recommends for the next series does very much go into the dogma of the Gnostics. And this idea of, well, my suffering is not just my suffering. There's a cosmic reason for my suffering, and I'm playing a part in the cosmic unfolding of everything. And that's why I'm suffering. So that's then how Gnosticism relates to Paul. And quite honestly, when I was reading the text on Gnosticism, a lot of the New Testament phrases jumped into my head. I wanted to mention, I forgot about it earlier, you might want to read the Gospel of John in preparation for the next episode.
Okay.
Just I don't know if John mentions it, but it's the most Gnostic gospel. And so it will be cool. And it's always fun to read. the Bible. So,
She says. It's funny that it's the Gospel of John on top of that. So
yeah, it's meant to be.
it's meant to be. Yeah. One of those synchronicities.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, the meat of this episode actually is the existential understanding of Gnosis. And then in the next episode, or I guess maybe in the end of this episode, he gets into historical figures. Or maybe it's the next episode.
I think he's only going to get it. I haven't watched the next episode again yet.
Rewatched it.
I'm going to watch it on this huge big screen today.
Yeah. Nice.
So,
Get your popcorn.
yeah. I've got biltong actually, which is a South African delicacy. The guy who I'm cat sitting for always leaves me biltong in his fridge when I come to cat sit. Lovely.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Okay, well then, we're just going to really get into this existential understanding as Gnosticism as a way of thinking, as opposed to, like you're saying, there are dogmas associated with Gnosticism.
Yeah.
So this is more about orienting the self.
Yeah, a way of thinking, a way of being spiritual, actually. I think it's better. Like one of the books that he suggests for the next episode, focus on it's a type of spirituality, Gnosticism. And that's what because I think John sees the value, because at a certain point he mentions, I hope you all have Gnostic experiences one time in your life, like, because it's this great transformative experiences. So he values Gnosticism, but the dogma, I can very clearly see why he would not value that. So he chooses to focus. I'm not sure. He says that's just the way it is. I'm not sure that that is really the way it is, but he chooses to focus on Gnosticism as a way of being spiritual instead of dogmas and church communities, and that there's specific Gnostic communities and things like that. He says that wasn't necessarily the case. I think there's scholarly dispute about that. So it's a long time ago, and I mean they were a silent community, as far as we know. We know most of them through the church fathers who wrote against them, and they had the vow of silence, probably, as far as I can tell. I remember, and so yeah, we don't know much. So there's always scholarly dispute about things that we don't know much about. So
right, yeah, as there should be.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's the opener. So he then tells us that we're going to go back into Cogsci.
Yeah.
Which was intimidating because the first time we went into Cogsci, I felt like I was just scrambled for brains. So when you said that, I was like, oh, great. Now I've got to really listen and pay attention. But you and I both commented on the fact that this one felt very culminating, like it was like there was nothing. It almost seemed, not that it was true, but when I was listening to it the first couple of times, like I was not learning anything new. It just all felt like the biology episode where it was just all natural. This all makes sense. And yeah, it almost felt intimidating to try to talk about this episode because it was like, what words can I even say? We've already said it, and almost like there's no way to articulate this in a way that it feels productive, I guess.
Yeah. Well, he does say that he's basically referring back to things he already spoke about. Like he refers to participatory knowing, perspectival knowing, and the transformative experiences, which he says he already went through. I'm not sure that he actually talked about to the 2 P's of knowing in the Awakening series yet. I know we know it because we talked about it privately, and I sent you that link and everything. But and if you know John, you know his 4 P's of knowing. But so it is like a lot of John's thought that we are familiar with coming together in this episode. So that's why it feels like there's nothing new. But how do I talk about it? Indeed, because this is new for us talking about it now. That is what is new here. It's like okay, so now we have to express it. So be kind and gentle to us, listener, because this is new.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting too, because he goes a little bit into it and we'll get to it in a second. In fact, now, because he recaps worldview, talks about agent arena, and then gives the example of Spinoza and thinking about things Spinozically. And in what we're describing here, we're almost thinking as John. Like we've now gone through so many episodes and you the whole series, but for me, like really focusing in on these 17 episodes that we've done now. And I feel like now I'm starting to take on more of his way of thinking. Not to say
Mhm.
that I have all of John's understanding now
Mhm.
and I can, embody that all the time, but it's like when he talks about things now, it feels like a helmet. Like we've now put a helmet on. And same thing with biology. Let me take this helmet off and put on a biology helmet. So yeah.
It's very much part of my decision to devote myself to John for 3 years is because I desperately want to take on his perspective, but I
Mm-hmm.
also deeply realize that his perspective is not an uncomplicated one.
Yeah.
So it does take doing things like this to really get into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I indeed think that maybe we are having glimpses of what it's like to see like John, but
Mm-hmm.
there's still a lot to be discovered, which is great. Which
Yeah.
is great.
Yeah. Still very bright. Yeah. So he says seeing what he's saying as but rather we're changing seeing what he's saying to seeing it the way he says it.
So taking on the perspective, acquiring a new perspectival knowing, way of knowing now like Spinoza, or like
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to,
Spinoza knows.
yeah. Oh,
Spinoza
and like
knowing.
I want to correct myself because I do think I said that on a recording. Spinoza is not his favorite philosopher. Um, in a Q&A, someone asked him who his favorite philosophers. He said, like, "Oof, that's asking who your favorite lover was." Like, and he said, "But if a gun's put to my head or something like that," he said, "then I would say Plotinus." But Spinoza is a great love of his life as well. Uh, uh, who mentioned a couple of times that Chris gave him like all of Spinoza's work, a collection of all. I wonder if he actually gave it in because a lot of what Spinoza wrote was in Dutch because
Mm,
Spinoza is Dutch. So I imagine he gave him translations. So I will one day give him Dutch.
the
He won't
actual Dutch.
read it. I can read it. Oh,
Nice. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, cool. So it's on the record now. You've made your correction. It's not actually his favorite, but a close second.
Especially since next week we're coming to Plotinus.
Okay, okay.
I
Yeah.
mean, the whole is quite big and after Socrates as well. So thank you for
Good.
this
You've cleared the
footnote.
record. Okay, so um yeah, he's talking here about the lens by which you see the world and yourself. And so then having this ability can allow someone to enter a particular agent arena configuration that will help them to take a step forward. Because then we're going to get into this idea of sensibility transcendence.
Mm. So what just comes up, you don't want to take on the worldview of someone who you don't admire, because that's exactly you want to upgrade. You want to
Mm.
level up by taking on a new worldview, and yeah,
Yeah.
into a higher self and a higher agent arena uh, relationship.
Yeah.
Yes, sensibility transcendence
Sensibility transcendence based on Murdoch and the sovereignty of the good.
of good. He always also says the good, but it's because we're used to talking of the good, but it's just good,
Just good. I like that.
just good. Yeah,
That's a good
the
correction to
sovereignty
make.
of good.
Sovereignty of good.
Yes. And a reminder, your life will be less if you have not read this.
I should get my copy.
We can play the game like what I talked
Yes.
about.
Yes, I want
So
to play the
I
game.
have a few name things here and then page numbers.
Okay.
So study is one, narrative is one, love is one, virtue is one, but there's a lot under virtue. Ritual is one, presuppositions, I think, is one, quality is one, prayer is one, gnosis is one, decision is one, despair, arts or fantasy, the eternal, attention, and Kierkegaard. But let's not choose Kierkegaard because she's not very positive.
Okay, what stood out for me was ritual and gnosis.
Okay, so I'm gonna
Gnosis
come.
because obviously it's
Yeah, ritual. Okay. Ritual. It's just a definition. An outer framework which both occasions and identifies an inner event. So,
occasions and identifies an inner event.
yes, so it's expressing something that happens internally, ritually. Like, uh, um, well, Don and Chris talks about confession in their last, the one that was just released, 20. And
That's
that is
relevant.
a type of ritual that expresses, that ought to express, if it's a true confession, that ought to express an inner event,
Mm-hmm.
an inner, repentance and desire to be better, uh, then expressed by actually going and to saying, "Father, forgive me, for I have sinned." As far as I know, I only know it from the movies.
Yeah. So yeah. But yeah, the idea is that then you go back to the pew and you do the Hail Marys, Our Fathers, and that's your repentance.
Okay, and your way
Because
of paying.
the priest will assign you okay, do 5 Our Fathers and 10 Hail Marys. And
Okay.
you go and you do your yeah. And in that way it's not really punishment, it's more just a meditation or a reflection, which is kind of nice too.
Yes, and I think Chris says something about real confession. What it ought to do is it ought to, well, it ought
Do it.
to orientate you towards the good.
Yeah.
And that is probably why then Hail Marys and Our Fathers are. So it's to orientate you towards the good. That's the true intention of
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's
yeah. As I meditate over the things that I've said I've done wrong, because it was me that made that confession. I'm the one announcing these things that I've
yeah,
done.
yeah,
Now I see those as wrong, so what is right? Now while I go to the pew and I think about what's wrong, I'm talking about Mary and our Father and all the things that I believe and
yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
it's really that's
It would be
powerful.
really sad if you confessed and the priest goes like, "Shit, child, there's no help for you.
Oh no, you need to get out of here. You're gonna catch on fire.
I'm going to be struck by thunder just sitting close to you."
There's no help for you.
I'm quite sure he won't. And if he says that, then you can confess to me, and I will give you an amount of Hail Marys and Our Fathers.
Okay, thank you. Actually, my priest is really a cool dude. We've learned from my grandma, so he will probably
Yes.
take it well. All of the things I have to confess. Um, sovereignty of good, trying to get beyond the rules of morality and more focused on the viability of morality. So yeah, that whole idea of agent arena relationship, the salience landscape, and how we orient those such that we do the good.
Mm. It's basically what she writes about. So, like I mentioned, he focuses most on the first essay in this book, but I do the second and the third is just mind blowing. And basically, I think what she argues for is a devotion to the good uh, above all else, and that is that changing your salience, that um, we wish to do good for no other reason because we are devoted to the good,
Mm,
something like that.
mm,
Um,
yeah.
it was the second time I reread it for this episode. I've read it a long time ago when I first got the book, and it's if you haven't read it twice in your life, then your life will be less.
Even less.
Yeah, even less.
Ah, yeah. Yeah, that hits because he often says too in a lot of places in this episode that that was kind of that's what religion provided, was
Mm.
like a way to orient oneself towards the good, or yeah, in this
Mm.
case.
Yeah. And it's really, really deeply missing. Uh, this she makes a really good argument as a non-believer, as someone who is a naturalist,
Mm-hmm.
about this. I forgot where I what was the one but it's anyway, it's really beautiful.
It,
Her this book.
well, I was going to bring up that I was telling you about the Stonyfield yogurt guy, the
Mm.
CEO, I should say, CEO as he calls himself, who oriented his business towards the good, or towards good, which
Yeah.
was not profit margin, but quality product. And he wanted to
Mm.
be sure that the yogurt that he was producing was made from organic milk, sugar, and that the farmers were being paid well and not based on the price that it was in commodities exchange and that kind of thing. So he's like really focused on and ensuring that his product is good, and even if that means taking away from his marketing budget and
Mm.
figuring out different ways of doing marketing with, through the grapevine, or um he mentions like fun little jokes that he would play on people. I don't know what those were, but he would have little jokes and then people would remember him in that way. So yeah, and then he had a good customer base because they were all seeing what it was that he was trying to build wasn't just to make profits like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, that he was actually focused on the quality of his product, and taking pride in what it was that he was doing. So orienting even your business towards the good, as opposed to what we often associate with good, which is money. Like, okay,
Mm.
I can have everything that I want because that's that having mode, versus
Mm.
the being good.
Mm. But there's also a thin line there. That's why the fact that he wanted to pay the farmers steady prices, that's what really jumped out to me as
Mhm.
being good. Because I mean, the Netherlands is very organic, which is great because you get organic prices, food for really affordable prices. Um, but it's a bandwagon. Is that what you call it? That people
Yeah, it's a
jump on.
height, like a trend. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, but then specifically, there's like, I want to focus on good quality, on being good. But what they mean is like, and so you have to pay a lot of money for it.
Yeah.
So it can also be a way to make more money.
Yeah, yeah, just a
It's
marketing scheme.
just a marketing scheme. So
Yeah, that's why
it's,
I mean, that's why it's a full-time position to be thorough in your investigation of the brands that you're looking into. That's why people need me in the vitamin store.
yeah.
They don't need me because I'm an expert. I don't know shit. I don't know nearly anything about the body. I don't know.
Well, you do know shit because you're in compost. So
I
you do
do
know.
know shit. You're right. I'm in an intimate relationship with shit, but but yeah, people come to me for advice, and it makes me feel like I'm in a powerful position, but you just start to realize how much work it takes to know anything about a brand, because that's what they asked me. First question when I showed them two different things that they could buy. You're looking for vitamin D3. Well, here it is in Solarate and here it is in Vitamer or whatever. And they're like, okay, so which one's good?
Mm,
Well, they're both good. These are both quality products. We don't take in low quality products to my store, but
yeah,
they're so used to going somewhere and possibly making that
yeah,
wrong decision of, I picked the fake one. I picked
yeah,
the joke, the thing that wasn't real.
yeah, yeah, and which is in our society, alas, very possible. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's,
Oh,
I mean, of course, I'm talking about objects and consumer goods, but I'm also thinking about
yeah.
trying
Where it
on
comes from.
different
Yeah,
styles
yeah,
of living. And
yeah, yeah,
well, maybe if I work my way up to the top of this corporation, then I'll finally have
yeah,
all that,
yeah.
happiness. And you don't.
No, no. Oh, this is a really interesting, like choosing the good and being able to discern what is truly good from what is pretending to be good. That's
Yeah,
also an
that's even
interesting part.
harder. Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, you can at least have that realization that, okay, I need to be selecting towards the good. But if you can't even figure out what that is,
Yeah.
then you're well, let's not say that, but like in that moment you might feel hopeless because it's like, well, I
Yeah.
don't even fucking know where to start.
Lost is
Lost.
maybe, you're
Yeah.
a bit lost.
Yeah, I imagine my customers just walking through the aisles like, where is that D3? I just know there has to be a bottle of D3.
But that brings me back to religion and the absolute void, because religion kind of provided you with some security, like this is good, this is real
Mm-hmm.
good. And that's why when you lose your religion, you feel terribly lost, because you've lost this the star, you've lost the North Star. It just disappeared.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like yeah. So, but I think we might need to get back to the
Yeah,
episode.
sorry. Okay, because it was like, oh, I was blasting off. All right.
But
Yes.
this is good. This is lovely. I love this.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So when he talks about that whole idea of sensibility transcendence, he gives the example of a mother-in-law that doesn't like her daughter-in-law. She doesn't like her wife's son because she's got qualities about her that the mother-in-law doesn't like. Like she might be coarse, she might be loud, she might be uncouth, and just in general beneath the dignity of her son. But if she utilizes that agape, that forgiving, then she can perhaps open herself up to an insight and allow herself to reframe, but it's a bi-directional insight is what he's emphasizing. It's not just a reframe, what an insight would be. This mother-in-law is having a bi-directional insight of self and world transformation.
Mhm. Because she sees differently, she becomes differently. Or because she becomes differently, she sees differently. The two are circle.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah, inseparable.
mm. John often says there are some truths that you can only know by being transformed.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
that kind of
He says participatory change, co-change, not just a reframe, it's a transframe.
mm. He likes his trans words.
Trans words. Transframe.
Transjective, transframing. It's yeah. Transformation. It's a
um,
transformation of the whole framing process, he sees, he says.
yeah. Her framing was wrong. There's a developmental transformation, which is this sensibility transcendence.
Mm.
Simultaneously, the daughter-in-law can become someone that she wasn't, or she can be someone that she wasn't, while the mother-in-law is becoming someone else she couldn't be before. Her sensibility is being transformed, which is Agent Arena.
Yeah, yeah. Is that if the agent changes, the arena changes.
Mm-hmm.
And often when the arena changes, the agent changes. So that's why it's oftentimes good to put yourself in a different arena if
Mm-hmm.
you're existentially trapped.
Yeah.
He doesn't mention that, but yeah.
Well, I mean, he just goes into here, entering into a worldview. That's what Christianity was offering. I think I even said that before too, offering that um, ability to enter into a worldview.
Yeah. Metanoia,
Metanoia
worldview change. Yeah.
of radical transformation. So nice, positive. That sounds good for a mother-in-law to now appreciate her daughter-in-law. However, he says consider the opposite and having an inability to enter into or make viable to yourself a new way of being. So just feeling completely stuck.
Yeah. Yeah. He gets to the reasons of love in this as well. And the
Which is
unthinkable. Yeah.
recalling Frankfurt
Yeah.
bullshit.
Yeah. And he's unthinkable, and I can't bring myself to live in that world. It's completely so you can think it, but you can't be it. You can't become it. Um he uses the, which I very much relate to, the whole, if we're going to talk about the negative, like the whole I long for a deep and meaningful romantic relationship, but I just don't know how to do that. And yeah, that's one way of being stuck. Like
Yeah.
you can see the positive side, but you can't necessarily. Although, yeah, I always say if you really want something, you will get it. So, but then it means there's something in you that's blocking it.
Yeah.
And that is exactly maybe what the existential inertia is. Something in you is blocking it.
And maybe it's that thing that's blocking it is that thing that you don't like about yourself, but you also don't want to change about yourself.
Exactly. Well, I always there yet, or is it?
You know,
Let's.
we way jumped. Yeah, I jumped so far with that. That was like a
Well, that is
leap.
exactly. If I think about my with the experience, the longing for a deep and profound relationship. I love my independence.
Hmm. You're preaching to the choir here. Yes. I don't know what my life will look like when I am participating in it with someone else that's there all the time.
Yeah,
Like
and
it's
I have the. We both have the unfortunate position of having had that and having had a really bad experience of that. Like I'm quite traumatized by my marriage, and I can assume you're also quite
mhm.
traumatized by your long-term relationship. So that's even worse, maybe, when you know how something like that is like, and you know it's bad.
Fucking terrible. I'm not doing that shit again. Yeah, I know. Which is so counter to like how we are normally thinking that women think, which isn't, I don't think it's true at all. But we get conditioned to, might be like jumping over all kinds of psychologist toes here. But it just seems to me that, yeah, like I don't think that the default nature of women is to feel like we have to have a partner. And I almost like, yeah, I'm at this stage now where I'm just like, it's just so much extra to have to like balance myself with somebody else as opposed to just having time to just be alone.
Mm,
Well, okay, so I just mentioned how culture kind of inspires, we could say, us to be in partnership, but there's also and so I was like, that's a problem. Like, I don't need a man. But we also want to emphasize that there's also this issue with culture where there's this hustle culture, boss bitch. It's like women need to be successful and also you would be a full-time mom. And I know that that's like now it's kind of cliche to bring up that.
yeah.
But yeah, so you had something to add to that too.
Yeah. It's we don't want to be in a relationship because the culture expects us to be in a relationship because that's what women are supposed to want. But we also don't want to not be in a relationship because culture now expects women to be independent and not needing a man, um, because that also doesn't feel quite right. It doesn't feel balanced. It feels as if we are somehow lying to ourselves. Either position we take, it feels as if both are a lie, which is a very weird place to be because in both I say like, and wanting a man because of certain reasons is a lie, and not wanting a man because of certain reasons is a lie. So it feels like we need to create a new myth
Mm-hmm.
about why men and women need each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the culture is ripe for that. It's like, because the whole together uh, theme is really strong and growing, and that it's about the whole, the bigger picture. It's not just about the individual anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're moving out of this individualism. So yeah, so we also we have to learn, like what you mentioned, we have to learn how to listen to ourselves and how to listen to our bodies, and not about what the culture wants, but what, well, again, well, you also said we need to steal the culture again. So
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
like, because the culture needs to obviously play a role in this,
Mm-hmm.
but the culture that we've inherited and the culture of the 50s, that's like women are supposed to be barefoot in the kitchen, and the culture of the 60s of women should just fuck whoever they want to fuck whenever they want to fuck, and the culture of, I don't know when it was, when it became like women should be like this great force in the world. Well, all those cultures have something beautiful in them, but they're completely, I don't know, it needs to be reinterpreted.
Yeah, because I was talking about another book that I had started to read about a doctor who was really capable of treating women in her OBGYN clinic, but then she ended up having her own baby and was so focused on continuing to care for her patients that she wasn't focused on her own body and what she needed. And of course, she felt the distress of leaving her baby when she had to go to work and all these things, and all this stress is building up in her body. And it gets to a point where she has her milk duct is blocked by like a cyst or something in her breast. And she has all this knowledge of how to take care of other people and even how to take care of herself, but she wasn't applying that knowledge. So she calls up to a women's clinic, like a free resource. So the woman that answers the phone is kind of like a knowledgeable, but through experiences of other people and maybe even her own experiences. It's not an education that this woman seemed to have from the way the doctor presented her. Because it was like the woman told her to apply a compress and some other instructions, and the doctor did it and it worked. And she's thinking like, wow, this woman had embodied wisdom. She has like, that's what women have, is there's wisdom of how to care in here. And so that's something she wasn't expressing, even though her job title was to care for people, but she
And
wasn't
women
embodying it.
specifically, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And she was doing it in the very masculine way of, I've
yeah.
accumulated all of these words and now I can label things. So yeah. Um, I think all that to say there's a need to restructure our understanding of our agent arena relationship within culture as far as this dynamic of being a man and being a woman and what that actually means.
That's well said. That's exactly it, I think.
So, entering a worldview, um, what Christianity was offering, that metanoia of radical transformation. And we were just considering the opposite of that with that inability to enter into a new world. So, that unthinkable realm of these are things that are possible, but I have no idea how to get there. And I also can't, this unlivable.
Mm.
He said another word, I think like unviable or something.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
unviable.
but it's
I
not
wrote
about
something like unviable, but my spelling, my handwriting is not makes it impossible for me to read.
So he's like, I could run the thought, but it's not a viable alternative. It's unthinkable. Now, there, because that seems very noble and nice, like he doesn't want to kick his son out.
Yeah, the way to think of the unthinkable, he says, and then he uses the example of Jason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because he's like, and he even says, like, I'm not trying to be moral here by saying I wouldn't kick my son out. It's just unthinkable for me.
Mm.
And the same is true in my situation of my grandpa having dementia. Like he's getting like bad. And we're now having discussions in our family of, well, how do we move forward? Because it's looking like we're going to have to send him to a facility. And that's like almost unthinkable for us at this point because we've been living in a way for so long now that putting him into a position of complete everything's different is it's almost unthinkable for us because we don't know how he's going to act. We don't know what's going to happen. Who's he going to be? Does that send him into not knowing anybody if he's constantly surrounded by shit he doesn't know? So yeah, there's this positive way that we're trying to go about staying in this unthinkable or yeah, having this unthinkable
Thinking the
scenario.
unthinkable, considering the unthinkable.
Considering the unthinkable. Yeah. So
Mm.
yeah, that's the positive
Mm.
unthinkable, I guess you could say, or the positive way that the unthinkable can influence us.
To manifest, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we already spoke about the negative. I jumped it a bit.
Mhm.
I thought that
Yeah.
was where we.
So we've arrived. If you're stuck in a worldview, where you can't go through the sensibility transition or transcendence that will make that worldview viable to you. So you're literally just stuck and you can't go through that change. You can imagine the scenes, the affirmations, you can experience, uh, or you experience existential inertia. You can't go through the change. Yeah. And he says things like, I end up here again. How do I keep getting stuck here? How do I stop suffering? And these are all the important questions that we're all always asking and just not talking about.
Yeah. The struggle of being human, almost, that is.
Mm-hmm.
Like knowing where we think we want to go, but not knowing the way there.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really even knowing where we really want to go.
No, exactly. That's the hard part. And so for me, I was thinking, oh, you're going to.
Yeah, I think that's why this is important, because he mentions love as that which kind of guides us in knowing where we want to go.
Mm.
And
Yeah, I was thinking about how, for me, with astrology, understanding my own patterns and the cycles that I get stuck in, it helps to know what's happening with the planetary movements because then it tells me what cycles are the big cycles. So it's
mm,
like we were talking about like Mercury retrograde, and you joked with your friend that there was technological issues. Mercury must be retrograde. Well, it is. And so it's like, so, but you didn't notice that cycle because you're not attuned to that cycle of Mercury's cycle. But I
it was
am.
just because I communicate with you often, and I had all these technical difficulties, and then my colleague also mentioned she had difficulties, and I was like, well,
Yeah,
that must be it.
exactly. And so that, but that's the thing is like I notice those things and I probably think of them more acutely, like I get like a kick out of it. It's almost like that's a little game. Okay,
Yeah.
haha, Mercury retrograde. And so yeah, but there's um I was going somewhere about my relationship with the planets tells me their cycles. So then I have
Mm,
like this understanding, okay, that's what they're doing. And then I can extrapolate from that my own cycles so that I can work through those. Because,
mm,
Mercury retrograde, okay, there's technological issues. So that's not something I'm influencing. It's kind of the way that my mind
mm,
works
yeah.
about it. It's like, okay, well, then what's in this cycle that I can have some sort of contribution? And it would be like, slow down, review your email before you send it, or whatever it is. The reflection then is on me. Okay, and so like so hypothetically, I could understand how I keep ending up here. Like, oh,
Mm,
that's my cycle. That's my
mm.
yeah, that's how I
And understanding is the beginning of transformation.
mm,
Understanding why you keep
mm,
ending there.
nice. So I mean well, we're gonna get to the whole idea of like what therapists provide and what the Jeeb um directors provide, but first we are talking about um losing agency. So what can happen when people hit this radical existential inertia is that they can lose their agency. And then he talks about how Jung often would have patience or noticed a trend of patience is this feeling of being stuck, of not being able to move when you should be able to move. And I know I've experienced that
Yeah.
personally. So,
So I want to say two things to that. First, when he said like that it's a loss of agency if you can't do something, and this is very personal, but I'm going to share it. Um, because like I said, the only thing that I seem incapable of, although I said that to a friend slash colleague recently, and she said, no, you can do anything, is having a profound and deep relationship. It's with a man. It does seem to be the only thing I'm incapable of.
mm,
So, but the reason I tell myself why I don't necessarily want it is because I want to keep my agency. Because that was what was taken from me in my relationship. I had no say over my own life. And so, but then when he said you lose your agency by not being able to do something that you actually want, and I was like, fuck.
yep.
Like exactly this, the thing that I don't want to lose, and that's why I'm not necessarily pursuing that, is exactly what I'm losing because I don't make the effort to train myself in how to have agency, how to be able to do something that I'm not capable of doing. So I'm diminishing my agency by trying to keep my agency.
Mm-hmm.
That felt very like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like,
The same
yeah.
machinery. God damn Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think of it with in terms of my job and finally deciding on getting a job and how
Mm,
long it took for me to ponder over my ability to um, make consistent money with
mm,
astrology, and okay, but if I take a job, then I don't have as much time that I can contribute to astrology. And so, but I need money because I'm going on this big trip. And so it was like going in a circle about that of why don't I have money? Well, because you don't have a job. Well, why don't you have a job? Because I'm building a business. Why are you
mm,
building a business? To make money. So, but
mm,
yeah, so finally like I made the decision to get a job and be back in the polis, which wasn't something that that wasn't something that occurred to me. But yeah, like, okay, now I'm in a place where people are coming to me and it's changing who I am as an
mm,
agent because people respect me. And before it was, I'm the granddaughter, I'm the daughter, I'm running
mm,
errands, I'm doing things that people need done. And, I'm the baby of the family. So nobody's really going to listen to me, even though I have a wealth of information about health that they could benefit from, they're not going to listen to me. And what I find in the store is we have elders that come to me. I have young people that come to me. I get to interact with young people. I left work yesterday laughing. I was
ah,
happy.
that's
and
lovely.
and that's something that I still experienced here, but
Mm,
I'm able to introduce more of the positive into my life so that I can bring that here, like I get to carry it home as opposed to constantly being stuck in this cycle of negativity. Why am I stuck? Because
mm.
I continue to participate in this cycle of negativity.
You opened your world. It's that
Yep.
upwards spiral that John talks about. And I knew I made a print skin of this morning because I knew it will come back. E.M. Foster wrote, it might be a South African writer. We must be willing to let go of the life we have planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us.
Oh, yep.
That feels like that's something you were describing.
Yeah, yeah. The plants called me back. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, yeah. Um, And that comes down to wanting to have control over the story.
yeah,
You make plans so that you have control, so that your boundaries are set. But
yeah.
yeah, then you don't realize that you're missing out on this really beautiful thing that's happening over here for you.
It's again the agency thing. I, there's some sort of paradox, like you grow your agency by relinquishing, what's the word, by letting go of your agency, you increase your agency, something like that.
Yeah.
There's,
Perceived agency. I think
yeah,
you relinquish your perceived agency
yes,
to
yeah,
embody your true agency
yeah,
or the
to
most beautiful.
become a more uh, powerful person. Because the way I read Plato, because Plato writes a lot about power and how important having power is, but I see that as having agency.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
um, you increase your agency in that you become a more powerful, because you're now a more powerful person. You actually have real influence on a lot of people's lives, not just
Yeah.
your immediate family.
Yeah.
And you did that by relinquishing what you thought were your agency because you were
Yeah.
your own boss, sort of thing.
Right. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. Boss
yeah,
bitch. No, I'm just kidding. I was not hustling as hard as that's intended, but that's exactly it. Yeah.
yeah.
I
And
was
I
like,
could very much preach that to myself, of course.
yeah, right,
I
right.
do realize that. It's like,
Exactly. We're always speaking to ourselves when we're scolding. I'm just
yeah.
kidding. Okay.
Oh,
So,
so I do want to tell my story of Jung as
yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So the reason why I went to study Jung is after my divorce, I experienced some kind of euphoria because it was as if I was released into. I always say like I crawled out of the grave, and I had a lovely husband. It was just he had reasons for being very refusing me to have a say over his life, which then in effect means I didn't have a say over my life.
Hmm.
So, but anyway, so I experienced a lot of liberation, and I was flowing, flowing, flowing. And then I remember clearly one day I bought my own apartment in Amsterdam, standing in my own kitchen. I physically almost felt like a wave crashing against something inside of me. and the flow just stopping. Like, and I was like, oh, I need help. I need therapy. And because of this, I knew a little bit about Jung, and I realized this flow stopping, that I need a Jungian therapist. So I jumped online trying to find a Jungian therapist in Amsterdam. And what I found was the Jung Academy in Amsterdam, which was a study, a 3-year study, which then, because if you study a lot of type of psychologists, if you study it, you also have to go through therapy. So I was like, yeah, well, this is great. I have to go through therapy and I get to study Jung. So that's how I discovered that's how I ended up studying Jung, because I realized I needed therapy.
Oh, it sounds like
And
participatory knowing.
yeah, it's a very deep form of knowing. It's yeah, it was lovely. But that's how my love story with Jung, well, rekindled, actually, because in
Yeah.
high school I was also quite in love with Jung,
Mm,
and then it was rekindled, my love of Jung.
yeah. Yeah, I was telling you, like I had a similar um there was a lot of euphoria right when I got out of the relationship, and then like
Mm,
a point at which I literally could not pack my bag. I was on the
yeah.
floor surrounded by belongings just everywhere. And a friend came over and she just so happened to be a psychologist. So
Oh yeah.
she was just like, you need to take a personality test. It was like random, but it's a
Yeah.
game. It's a little quiz, And so I hit that um existential moment of not being able to move forward, and my friend told me to take the personality test, which is inspired by Jung's personality types. So
And,
same for me too, was that experience of
oh, that's beautiful. I didn't. We both discovered or rediscovered Jung after a breakup,
yeah,
or getting out of a traumatic relationship.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
uh,
yeah. And that's what took me to astrology too. And Jung had some papers or letters that he wrote with Freud about
yeah,
astrology, where he's like, hey man, you got to get on this.
yeah.
So
Jung
synchronicity.
was also, incidentally, probably Gnostic.
Mm,
I have a whole book. When I'm back in my own place, I will next time I will also show the Gnostic Jung. Uh, so
cool.
yeah,
Okay. Let's see. So he gives this example of, well, because we're going to talk about L.A. Paul with the transformative experience and how this exposes us to deep existential ignorance.
radically ignorant on both sides.
Mm-hmm. Yes, radically ignorant on both sides. So
And
he says about a fruit, for instance, there's a kind of knowing that is dependent on your state of being. It's perspectival. This is something that he often mentions, that you have to experience it. So with the fruit, are you going to try the fruit if it tastes like vomit? If it could possibly taste like something nice and sweet and nectar. So that's the question, is like, are you going to try the fruit? Because there's two possibilities of how it could taste. And um, in this situation, like it's not necessarily a transformative experience, whether or not, because he's like, this is like kind of inconsequential.
if I remember correctly, because I haven't reread the whole book again, she makes it a little bit more uh, heavy by saying you only get one breakfast.
Mm,
It's either this fruit or something else. So for that day, it's going to influence you, because if you take one bite and you
ah,
don't like it, then you don't get breakfast. So
yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. So that puts it into a little bit better perspective, but still not that
Mhm.
transformative. As is the example of vampire that he mentions, because he does the example of vampire because it's much more of a drastic transformation. Your
Mhm.
friend tells you that they can transform you into a vampire, and you have the option to do that or not. And so he says, but you don't know what you'll be like, and you don't know who you'll be.
Mhm.
You'll lose a way of being, but you may miss out on a way of being. So, yes, herein lies the problem.
Yes. I
There's,
don't know what I'm going to lose, and I don't know what I'm missing.
everything is at risk. And like you said earlier, radical ignorance on both sides because we face irreversible change, but no way to reason through it. And we'll be a different person. We're existentially ignorant.
Because we have absolutely, he's very emphatic about this. We have absolutely no idea what we will be losing. We could lose everything. We for a big change like marriage or children, you will lose everything.
Yeah.
You will lose your entire way of being. Almost, I feel like you will become
Yeah.
a completely different person. But so you're like, oh, I don't want to lose everything,
Yeah.
but you don't know what you're gonna gain,
Right.
and that might just be so worth it
Yeah.
that you should deeply consider making the leap.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah. Big risk, but perhaps big payout too. If you get
yes,
that,
but you don't know that.
you don't know.
You
It's a
don't know
risk.
that. Yeah. And there's another transfer. You're transfixed.
Transfixed. Mm.
What should I do? Oh,
So he talks about any developmental change. For instance, with a child, they don't know what childhood innocence is, but they also don't know what they would miss out on if they don't become an adult. I think these are just more examples of the same thing. That leads us into the thing that they want to change is the very thing they don't want to lose. So he's talking about this example of relations, or no, themselves. The person is talking about themselves, and they'll say, I'm stubborn. That's what I don't like about myself. And then you get further into the conversation, and what do they like about themselves? I'm persistent and I'm steady and yeah, reliable. And it's like the very thing that this person wants to change about themselves is the very thing that they don't want to lose, which could give this feeling of being stuck.
yeah.
So there's these two very, I'm sure, technical terms of stuck and stupefied, which he says stuck is, and he says this later, but can't imagine how, oh my gosh, what does that say? To make another worldview viable. So when you're stuck, you're in this state of that existential inertia. You can't imagine how to make another worldview viable. Where stupefied is you can't imagine the alternative and rationally make a choice based on an alternative. That's indecision. So inertia and indecision, but both being existentially trapped.
Because not choosing is also a choice. It's
Oof. Mm-hmm.
and he talks about child with all the possibilities. But because this is just in the opening of the book, we only learn what we really need to know after we have already committed ourselves. Letting go of all the possibilities and choosing one. And that brings me back also when we talked about devoting yourself to one way,
Mm-hmm.
well, the religion.
Yeah.
You lose a lot,
Yep.
but you gain depth and intimate knowledge.
Yeah.
I love this word, stuck and stupefied. I think I should get myself a t-shirt with this. I'm
We got a
stuck
lot
and
of t-shirts to make. We can make a lot of money. All proceeds go to the John Vervaeke Foundation.
you know there is actually a John Vervaeke
Yeah,
Foundation.
I do. That's why I said it. Announcement, everyone. Okay, so how do we get out of this state of being stuck and stupefied? What do people usually do, Lizelle? And how do you feel about it?
Okay, well, I think we agreed before we started recording that he mentions one thing that we both feel like, yeah, that's the thing. But let's keep that in suspicion before we get to that. He uses practical examples and he's very enthusiastic about it. And my heart starts racing because I'm about to disagree with John Vervaeke. But from my practical experience, he says people get a pet to learn how it is to have a child, or they go on a trip with someone to learn how it is to be in a relationship with them. And for me, both of those, what I've seen is that is kind of a way to bullshit yourself, rather, because having a pet is nothing like having a real child. And I've actually have a friend who did this on purpose, and now they love their pet so much they don't want a child.
Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah, but personally, since I've talked so much about my personal relationship, me and my ex were great on holidays. We were great on holidays. So just the fact that you're capable of holidaying well with someone
Yeah.
is really no indication of how well you'll be able to build a life with them,
Mm-hmm.
and make day-to-day choices together that you actually create a life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, making a
Yeah.
life with someone is not the same as being on a holiday with them.
Right.
So I think doing these things to test the water is, you're going to bullshit yourself.
Yeah.
There's a great risk of bullshitting yourself. It's I don't know what the alternative is. There's a
Well,
poem by Christopher Marlowe, like, come live with me and be my love, and somehow it feels like that's the only way to actually,
mm.
yeah, to
So what was
no.
coming up when you were saying it was that, because I was going to present my example of how this works for me, this whole idea of role playing, which you're not arguing. Yours is,
But that's the third one that I said we're going to get to, because that
yeah,
we both agree that does work.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
the role
ta-da!
playing, yes, da, 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 da. The role playing isn't the argument. It's that with the particular examples that he gave are just not great examples because it's
Yeah.
child planning. They get a pet, relationship. You go on a trip with them, and like you're saying, like that isn't a good way to gauge. Because also, my ex and I had a lot of fun together, but we were fucking terrible when it came down to living
Really.
together.
Yeah.
So, but the good example and what you're also agreeing with is that like role playing and getting into, and he goes into it further here with live action and this kind of thing. But from my experience of having been an online personality before I got into the real world after my breakup was pandemic, in the midst of the pandemic. So people weren't mingling. So when I got out of a relationship, there was no fucking person other than like this weird Canadian guy online that wanted to marry me. But anyway, that says that. So there was like no person available. And so, yeah, I hit this like, um, there's no playground to play in. And so I started playing online. I started playing
Mhm.
in Discord servers and the live action, becoming a live player course. I was taking all kinds of courses and getting involved in the STOA and all kinds of things like that, but in kind of like a peripheral. I wasn't like actually active in any of
Mhm.
them until it came to the Dark Horse Discord and I became the organizer of our karaoke group and I became a role and people knew me and then I'm a presence and so this is who I become and that initiated me into being able to be in community again because my ex had isolated me so much. I had isolated myself so much by being in a relationship with him that I didn't have any other roles that I could play. So it was good for me to have the ability to practice online. So in that instance, I got that role playing, and that it wasn't necessarily live action because I will say there is a big disconnect between being able to associate with people online and then actually
Mhm.
being in the real world with them, which I'm actually good at, but it's
That could
hard.
also be a way to bullshit yourself. All of this you
Yep.
can deeply
Yeah.
bullshit yourself by
Yep.
thinking. That's maybe the problem. Jumping to like the playing is exactly the same as the actual. That is maybe that is where the problem, because indeed being good online and being good in real life is very different.
Yeah. Well, I also want to mention too the fact that when he starts talking about Jeep form, because that's what we're moving into,
Yeah,
he's talking about like them acting out a scenario and how there's a
yeah,
director or kind of like a dungeon master and someone that's constantly breaking, hold on, stop, now do it
yeah.
this way. And
Mm,
so there's something to that where it's okay, that bleeding, there's something
mm,
to that idea of bleeding that he's talking about where it bleeds into your real
mm,
life, but there's
mm,
also something to that ability to pull out and it not
mm,
being so meshed together, of being able to
mm,
say, yeah, I can get out of this.
mm. What I'm thinking now, the great thing about Jeep form might be the fact that it's so obviously not real life, that you don't confuse that with how it will. It's not as confusing as thinking that, oh, I'm so great with this person on holiday, yay, we're gonna be
Mm.
great life partners. It's it's much easier to bullshit yourself in that than when it's so obviously role play.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and so I think what I was starting to realize was that when it's in relationship with someone else, it's much easier to bullshit as opposed to when it's me. Like I'm transforming myself by being an organizer in this Discord server. I'm transforming myself by being who am I to the people? Whereas in a relationship, it's how does this feel? Oh, this feels good, or at times this feels bad. But it's there's somebody else involved in my transformation that is always going to be present. So if that person's always going to be there, then how can I transform? Because they're always there. So there's something.
A part of me almost feels like we should only actually start this play once we have decided that we want to go there, because it feels like this play is more a way to practice than a way to than something to base your decisions on. But it's great practice to play. That's also actually the animals, because he refers to animals, smart animals.
Yeah.
Animals play to practice. They don't necessarily play to make decisions.
Right.
They practice. Okay, I need to be able to run away from a lion, so let's play that. No, I'm thinking of lion cub, so they wouldn't have to run away. But I need to be able to do something, so let's play this and pretend that it's obviously they're not thinking this, but that's how it is. So it's play is for me more practice than something to base decisions on.
Yeah. 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 Lots of different ways that we can play, but also definitely want to make that distinction of play being separate. Yeah. Well, and we've also mentioned the words imposter syndrome a lot. And you were saying like that's probably actually a good thing if you feel imposter syndrome.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think, but that is exactly it. It's so easy to confuse play with the real thing, I think, and it takes discernment, which maybe I'm not fair to mankind or humankind, but I don't know that people necessarily have the discernment needed to be able to discern between what is play and what is uh, it. And why I think imposter syndrome is good, because I think when people don't have that, it might be that they're too identified. They identify themselves too firmly with whatever it is that they're playing. Because everything is a play. I mean, play is the one thing that we agreed on. Like I said, that yeah, that's a good way to practice transformation. But I think more practice transformation than to decide on transformation. But everything in life is good. You could be. Jung talked about mask personas. And he actually said, like, because people might think like, okay, this is my persona. I'm a doctor, and this is all I have. He used this example. But we don't only have one persona. Almost with everyone we interact with, we have a different persona. Because if we have some sort of character development and some sort of even that same character development, like this is a big, taking on one mask, and it's not wrong. It's not wrong to have a mask, because also in this whole authentic thing, like we have to be authentic, we might think no, we're not supposed to wear masks, but that's not really possible for you not to wear a mask in normal interaction. Maybe in a really intimate relationship, there's times that a mask fall up. I don't know, but the problem comes when you only wear one mask, and you have your doctor mask when you interact with everyone, with your children, with your wife, and that is the problem. And I think when people have imposter syndrome, they realize that they are not their mask, and as soon as you lose that, maybe you have to start to worry.
Yeah.
like uh,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is kind of like an aside, as they kind of all are, but that brought up for me that people often over-identify with their career or their job title, and that is who they are.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and yeah, there's just something about that's how much we emphasize work in our
yeah,
culture as
yeah,
opposed to play. I'm going
yeah,
to identify with my work title because I
mm,
don't play.
yeah. Oh, that's sad. Yeah. Because that brings us to play. It's because I think John mentions we've made play a frivolous thing,
Yeah,
and
play
people
is
don't want to be frivolous,
right.
and
That's a
so we
waste of
think
time.
no, we can't play because we see play as frivolous. But
Mm-hmm.
then he goes in to explain how exactly play is exactly not frivolous, but it's
Right.
actually the deepest thing we can do is to
Yeah, and
play.
play is not just fun,
No.
which is what it's kind of like a synonym with the way we talk
Yeah.
about play and
Yeah.
fun is that they're
Yeah.
the same thing, but he's now going to describe how play is not just fun.
No.
It allows us to confront the possibility of a transformative experience, actually. And so he's got another term here, enactive analogy. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I wrote play is not fun. It is, oh, I made it. It's deep engagement with processes of transformation. And I think that's why I'm like, it's not helping to just to decide to transform. It's helping you actually to transform play.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's,
Because to do it, to like
yeah,
physical, the it's no longer in the idea realm when you play with it. It
yeah,
is now here interacting with me.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, which is exactly what we were going into with enactive analogy
yeah,
is
yeah.
an analogy that you enact. It takes skill to create the enactive analogy too. It's not just something that we're yeah, there's a skill to play. There's a
Mm-hmm.
skill to the enactive analogy in order to get it right, he says.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he mentions examples of like with Jeep um in help me out here, Scandinavia.
Yes, Scandinavian.
So
Cheap form.
they it's basically like this LARPing, I imagined when he was talking about it. LARPing is just live action role play.
I
Um
don't know laughing, but it sounds, when you say it out, it sounds like the same. Yeah.
yeah. Um and also he even brings in the example of a therapist being there to help somebody work through all their existential yeah things happening. And for some reason, like just came up for me, like a yoga instructor being there to kind of adjust your hips and stuff into
Mm-hmm.
place. They kind of just a little touch, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I need to focus on
Yeah.
that part of my body.
Yeah.
And all right, so this idea of enactive analogy, it has to be similar enough that you can feel it, but similar enough to this world so I can pull out. And
Mm.
of course, while we were talking in the unrecorded part of this, I told you I could not um, let go of the sexual innuendo that comes along with anytime somebody says pull out. Sorry. So,
And then I said, well, me neither. So we
yeah,
decided to talk about it.
exactly. So now we're talking about it. So it's interesting too, because this idea of enactive analogy and creation and pulling out and what pulling out does to creation, it averts
And
the creation, that thing that doesn't actually manifest if the man pulls out. So but there's this experience that it has to be similar enough that you can feel it, but similar enough to this world that I can pull out. So it's like similar enough that you can feel it. And I was mentioning too that this creation results in something that you put joy into, which is what the
mm,
child is in this idea of
mm.
transcending in sex, but also in creating a project or whatever.
Yeah, because the reason why men often opt for pulling out is they don't want to use a condom because they want to feel it, like really feel it. So, and then,
Yeah.
but they don't want a child, so they pull out. They don't want to make the transformative leap.
Yeah. To being a
They,
father. Yeah.
yeah. So, there's some, I feel really, there's something really sad in that.
Yeah.
It's like, the lack of commitment, I guess.
Ooh.
And I think that's why I'm probably also disagreeing with John so much in this, because for real, uh, to really know what it is about, you have to risk the great transformation. You can't really know if you don't go all in and don't pull out.
Yeah.
That, yeah, it's just not gonna uh, be what do you call it, inseminated, um, when the
And
egg and the,
oh, conception.
yeah, there's not gonna be any, you know,
Yeah.
it's, yeah, I don't know, like I said previously, I don't know if you can experience, if you can know anything
Yeah.
if
Well,
you don't deeply experience it. And you can only deeply experience it if you go all in and don't pull out.
Yeah. Well, I think that that is kind of the um trade-off for the man, is not experiencing that love that he would have towards the child, also the
Mm.
love that he would have in that relationship.
Mm.
And so I don't know where this sexual exploration is taking me, but
It feels to me like but maybe that's exactly what John wants to say. This is the safe option. There's no commitment. There's no commitment in this.
mm-hmm.
So you can experience it without any commitment.
But you don't experience the totality of it, which I think is what you're
Yeah.
getting at, is that there's that unknown still. And I
Yeah.
don't think that he's like arguing against that either. But yeah, it's just like
Yeah.
but you're not experiencing the thing. You're not
Yeah.
experiencing the thing that you're actually
It
being.
might be exactly the opposite of the
Yeah.
thing. That is what I'm afraid of, that it might be exactly the opposite of the thing that you truly will experience once you jump in.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the bullshit.
Mm. Yeah, because the pleasure of the sex might counter the complete aggression of the partners.
Yeah.
Their
Yeah.
passionate desire and lust for one another in bed might actually um, arise as rage against one another. And it seemed like, ooh, this is passionate, this is hot, this is
Yeah.
desire,
Yeah.
but then actually that manifests as something negative, the opposite of that love and not really
Mm.
love, but that desire for one another
Mm.
arises,
Yeah.
kind of like that.
I don't know if I mean exactly like that, but yes, in the sense that what you think you're experiencing, and so you think you get a taste of the real thing, might be exact opposite of what the real thing is. That's what my fear is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but I love playing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so keep playing. Because it allows you to see and sense the together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Because playing does, again, then it's actually a way to transform yourself. Play. It's actually binding us. And that's why we do need to recover play. Um,
to address the meaning crisis, we have to recover play, he says expressly. And that's what religion was. That's what ritual is, to put ourselves in the liminal space, that in between space. Which is interesting because now I'm thinking, like, can one just inhabit the liminal space?
just stay there, you mean? Like not make the
Well,
transformation.
because then you don't make the transformation. Well, but it seems like the liminal space is like this. Um, I'm imagining it as a column of light that I
Yeah.
can enter into, and I'm going to stay here in the liminal space, right? But there's nowhere to go in the liminal space, so it's not really that great.
I think that might be exactly where either I don't get John at all or where we disagree, because I don't see that they necessarily overlap. So I don't see, because he has these two blocks and then this is where the play happens, it overlaps. And I don't see that they necessarily overlap. Like, and that is why I'm worried about that you can bullshit yourself. Well, he seems to think that they definitely do overlap. And then in that sense, if they do overlap, then yes, you can stay in that golden.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine you can stay in that
Right.
liminal. But that is the same as the child with all the possibilities,
Yep.
that refuses to let go of all the possibilities, that
Mm-hmm.
refuses to commit to one path or one choice or one career or becoming one particular. Okay, none of us are only one particular character, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. 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 Well, I'm thinking of the liminal space as, all right, here we go. You know how we're talking about gnosis as not dogmas, a list of dogmas?
Mhm.
And so, in the same way, the liminal space not being a confined space of transition, but like this,
A place of only experience and no dogma.
yeah.
Okay. Well, in that sense, I think we're both in the liminal space.
Always, right? Like, so I stay here. We're frequent flyers. Okay, cool. I'm glad you got that because I was like, how do I talk about this
Yeah,
without words?
yeah.
Okay, cool. So we're in the liminal
But
space.
don't you
Welcome.
feel the desire to form dogmas or form propositions?
Yeah.
So there is
Yeah.
this desire to leave the liminal space.
Yeah. Yeah, there is. What's my cop out? But somebody has to stay watch, so okay, well, we can't stay in the liminal space, so let's move on.
Oh, we haven't really made any progress.
Imagine
But
that. You can't make progress in the liminal space. Who would have thought?
oh, that is so beautiful. That is an actor's analogy.
Okay, to see, well, God, fuck it. Okay, let's move on. To see how and if they should go through the change.
Yeah.
That's what the inactive analogy provides. Should you go through the change based on how you feel? Okay, anything to add there? So moving into anagage is to set things up so that as all of this around me is transcending, we're getting below the illusion of all that is around me, then I transform. That's because the reason that I mentioned anagage again, because we've already talked about anagage, is because he's now presenting a possible argument of anagage being very similar, if not the same, as sensibility transcendence, from what I gathered.
Mm. Yes.
And so that, again, anagage is setting things up so that as all of this is transcending, then I transform. And sensibility transcendence is how we enter into a worldview. So, in that way, they're similar.
Mm. We need to take on a new worldview if we want to upgrade. That's
Yeah.
that's basically.
Yeah. He says, therefore, I not only need an inactive analogy, I also need a way of enacting anagage.
Mm. I even made it. I wrote in active analogy equals inactive anagage. I made it even stronger.
I wrote anagage equals sensibility transcendence. But yes, inactive analogy equals inactive anagage. Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
I
I like
wrote.
that. I like that. And so again, religion. That was instructions on how to get unstuck. A therapist helping you to engage in anagage so that you know how.
Mm. Is how much we need other human beings in order to be able to transform ourselves.
Yeah.
That keeps popping up throughout our conversation.
Yep.
Even when you mentioned the yoga teacher, just lightly putting in how much we need other human beings in order to learn these skills.
Yeah, they're like the facilitator, the
Mm.
mediator.
Yeah, and we all have our our fields where we are able to be the mediator, the facilitator,
Yep.
and then we have fields where we are completely ignorant and we need others.
Yeah. Yeah. Even ritual behavior can get us unstuck, which is interesting because it's still in like this participatory way. It's still in some sense, I mean, it's
Mm.
involving something else, whether or
Mhm.
not it's another human, whatever it is, it's something that I'm devoted to. So that
Mhm.
ritual behavior.
Mhm. Mhm.
And he says that this is possibly and maybe most likely the reason that a lot of us in this um, community, this corner of the internet, is because we're hungry
Quote
for ways.
Sabina King.
What's that?
To quote Sabina King,
Okay, okay.
she quote that.
We're all hungry for ways of dealing with being existentially trapped. That's kind of like the through line with us followers of the Awakening series. And so
Well,
we'll engage in things like martial arts and also therapy and circling, um, authentic relating, and all of these
ritual.
ways, ritual of dealing with feeling existentially trapped, which became really real with pandemic. And I think even more real for me than ever before in my life. I don't think I ever realized how stuck I felt in my relationship, in my job, in my debt, in all kinds of things. I had never felt so stuck. And pandemic made it even more because it's like, well, you have to stay confined in between these four walls too.
It was like it was an enacted analogy because you were literally stuck, and because you were literally stuck, you enacted this being stuckness, and then you realized, oh yeah, I'm stuck existentially. Actually, also, I'm not just physically stuck. No,
Hmm.
a lot
Yeah,
of people.
a lot of
We
people.
were forced into an enacted an
Yeah.
analogy of being stuck,
Yeah,
and that's why John just blew up with the pandemic because
right.
then people woke up to the meaning crisis and
Right.
their personal meaning crisis.
That's really interesting. So yeah, we were all kind of forced into that analogy,
Yeah,
enacted
enacted
analogy.
yeah,
Yeah. And what did we do with that? That's the question. And that, I mean, also goes back to how I told you there felt like this big re-entry into the world when I got a job. Like,
yeah,
wow, now
yeah.
I'm here again, like it just felt interesting.
Well, because it's also you are now enacting an analogy of becoming unstuck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that is also it's also symbolically very rich what you're doing. You're symbolically re-entering uh, being an active agent in the arena and an arena that you are happy to be in.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, one that I'm familiar with, which is really
Yeah,
interesting, is that I kind of re-entered into an old arena, but it's new and there's new people around it.
yeah,
But yeah, I just zapped right back into that mindset of being able to
yeah.
help people. So,
That's cool because I'm also an old because I used to be a preacher and I'm now doing the priestess thing. So it's also old but new. It's
Jupiter cycle. Anyway. So, yeah, this now finally, okay, we've approached the beginning of maybe like a little description of what actually Gnosis is. And what I have written down is Gnosis frees us from being existentially trapped and allows us to try to bring about an altered state of consciousness.
he writes a lot of things on the board, altered or higher state and higher states of consciousness in a ritual context, in acted analogy, an acted anagoge, serious play. And Gnosis is this set of psychotechnologies to create the ritual context that allows us, like you said, to overcome being existentially stuck, existentially stupefied. Oh, but what am I going to do with my t-shirts if I become unstuck and unstupefied?
You better get back in that liminal space.
And that is being powered by an altered state of consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because he's talking a lot about these words that we've been discussing: flow, the mystical experience, a transformative experience. These are all the places that an altered state of consciousness can take us, even to a higher state of consciousness, if it's set within that ritual context that involves serious play, which he's now broken out into inactive analogy and inactive anagoge.
Mm.
And this cognitive flexibility can be improved by using psychedelics under supervision, I'll add.
Yeah.
And with the use of psychedelics, he says, can even free people from conditions like PTSD, which is powerful. To be able to help someone, or for someone to be able to help themselves into a state to free themselves from something like that, from post traumatic
Mm.
stress or something really, detrimental, trauma. The fact that we could do that, and it would just require a couple of caps of mushroom and a babysitter. That's our medical system.
Yeah.
It could just be that easy. All right. So, being set within the ritual context, as we say in the psychedelic community, set and setting. Like all those things are really important when it comes to the use of psychedelics, but definitely useful for cognitive flexibility because the connections that your mind makes when influenced by the substances like psilocybin, for example, it's just otherworldly. There's no way to describe it. If you do, you sound crazy. So and just one time, I feel like I'm
Mm.
preaching for it, but just like one time can be completely life altering. Like people have completely overcome alcoholism in a
Mm.
sitting. So yeah, that ritual context is really important for the inactive, for the serious play. Because you can play all day and just be doing it for pleasure, and there's no devotion. That's what the ritual provides, is that orientation toward good.
And usually these types of rituals, like the ones you now described, does involve other people. And
Mm.
that kind of harks back at when John said, like, the dangers of didacticism, like going on your own, it's very dangerous.
Mhm.
So, and that's why I think ritual usually also requires, it doesn't require, but in a religious setting, it required others as well.
Mhm.
Um, prayer, silent prayer on your own, of course, does not, and Bible study, and a lot of them don't, but it is in the context of the tradition.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it does involve other people.
You have a lineage.
Yeah, and there's just safety in numbers. That's
Yep.
just. I have one more sentence.
Let's hear it.
It gives us this an access anagoge, or the Gnostic way of knowing, gives us a sense of the greater reality that we can live in. And that is also very, I think, important to have feeling that your life has meaning, to be part of something greater.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah. Well, you had a quote from Love, right?
Oh, I'm, I'm hesitant,
Okay.
but I'm going to read it anyway.
Okay.
It's a love declaration. So, so that's why I'm hesitant.
I'm hesitant. I'll be hesitant with you.
So I'm first going to read, okay, what this book is basically about. I found a paragraph that says basically what it's about. What we love is necessarily important to us just because we love it. So how do you discover what's important to you? Just look what you love. There is also a rather different point to be made here. Loving itself is important to us. Quite apart from our particular interest in the various things what we love, we have a more generic and even a more fundamental interest in loving as such. And then to my Socrates and my Plato, or referring to them. Whatever burdens or distresses loving them may in the course of time have brought me, my life was notably altered and enhanced when I came to love them. Just that.
Mm, love it. Yeah. Ah, I like that because I don't think that we really presence the desire that we have just for love. Like not anything. Like I love this lotion.
Mm,
No, I love. Like I just love. And like having that,
mm,
we take it for granted that we even, yeah, feel that. So,
yeah. Which is sad, because I think um if God is love and we are made in the image of God, then we are love.
mhm.
And so to love is to express our deepest form of being. And maybe that's what we long for, to be able to, sorry, to express who we really are, which is love. And
That's a good way to end it. Yeah. Okay, friends. Well, we hope that you enjoyed our discussion as we break frame. Director cut. So enacted analogy here. But
I've recently thought that maybe doing dialectic into dialogos is a form of enacting uh, a ritual and enacting anagoge. So if you want to enact anagoge, come play with us.
come play with us. Yes, I like it. All right. Well, we'll see you in the next episode then. Bye for now.